By mid-1944, those pilots that had survived the training were sent to newly formed squadrons. Ground crews, too, were hastily recruited to service and maintain these new wonder weapons.
Generally speaking, my experience was that the ground crew tried very hard to ensure that the planes were always ready for takeoff. I did not get to know them well enough, because I always had to be ready for action and was waiting for an emergency takeoff. Sometimes that would not happen at all. Hence the saying, half of one's life one waits in vain.
Alarm! Alarm!
But the waiting was short-lived. With thousands of bombers now pounding Germany, every available pilot was thrown into action.
Really? So, gut. Ja, ist gut. Klar. Vorne und hinten.
On July 25, 1944, an Me-262 became the first jet airplane to be used in combat when it shot down a British photo reconnaissance Mosquito flying over Munich. It now appeared that the race for the jet fighter had been won. With it, the prize of victory in the skies was within the Luftwaffe's grasp. During the late summer of 1944, more and more German Luftwaffe pilots were taking their new Me-262 jet fighters into battle. It seemed as though they finally had a weapon that could beat the Allied bombers and their high-speed escorts.
There were two groups of 4 Mustangs in close formation, and they were so incredibly confident. They hadn't seen me, and that was a mistake. I actually felt sorry for the guys as they hadn't noticed me. I came from deep, low right and flew in there. We had 4 30mm guns, the Mark 108. That was an incredible fire, because the whole thing presented itself to me as a long, outstretched point you couldn't actually miss. And then 2 fighters dropped down. With one, I saw a parachute. With the other one, I didn't. That was such a case.
By late 1944, the 262s were attacking the Allied bombers with devastating effect. Allied fighter and bomber crews were unsure how to deal with them. Their speed and firepower were just too potent.
He's so close to the ground we couldn't get a shot. And then he goes, like, bye, fellas. And I just said to the rest of the crew, we just saw a real pilot.
We were jumped by an Me-262 and only got a very short glimpse of him because he made an attack from about 3 o'clock high, and he came down through the group, and he went by so fast we couldn't hardly see him. It was really a shock because it was like nothing we'd seen before.
The German pilots had not felt such supremacy in the air since the early days of the war. They were confident that this incredible plane would turn the tide.
I flew to the area around Dresden and went down to 16,000 feet. When I spotted 2 fighter planes, as they were above me, I increased my altitude, and I took one of the fighter planes in my sights. In those days, the machine guns and cannons were automatically switched on. I had 4 cannons, and I gave off a burst of fire. And before I knew it, the pilot had parachuted out of his plane. Where I had hit him, I did not know. It was all very new, much too fast. And then suddenly, I saw the second fighter plane in front of me. And I fired at it, and it went down, surrounded by smoke that looked like a flag.
But it was the bombers that were the Me-262's real prey. Luftwaffe pilot Alfred Ahms was on a routine patrol when he came across a B-17 on its 13th mission.
Everyone quickly chose a plane without having any great discussions about whether they were going to take this or the other plane. Instead, you would say, the best position for me is the one in the middle. After all, there were enough planes in the sky, which made it easy to pick one.
The rear gunner in that particular B-17 was 19-year-old Craig Bennett.
He came so fast. All you had time was just pull the triggers and let the guns fire. And aim them as best you could at this thing.
I was aiming at a fortress when suddenly ahead of me there was a large wall of fire into which the captain of my squadron and others disappeared.
The first plane was the leader, and he hit our plane. And the plane just blew up. The whole plane exploded, his plane and ours.
I was able to fly over the wall of fire. It turned out that the fortress had exploded and taken two adjacent planes with her. That's how big the explosion was.
And the tail broke off and started falling. And the rest of the plane was gone. I was the only one that got out of my aircraft.
Craig Bennett spent the rest of the war as a POW. Yet it was not